Hey guys, welcome back to another Tandem Talk. Today we get to hang out with 90's Golden Drift Spot Project. There are a number of members on their team, and today we get to talk with Soyo. We went a little bit long, so I'm breaking this into two parts. You're on part one, and in this part we're going to talk about their projects, what they have done, their modding process, and what they have coming up in the future before we kind of go onto the deep end about just modding and the culture of Assetto Corsa in general. So look forward to that. But one note before we start, we didn't have cameras for this, so it is just an audio podcast. So put it on when you're working on your car, when you're driving in Assetto, and get schooled. Check it out. Here we are with Soyo from 90's Golden Drift Spot Project, and just give the folks listening a little intro to you and to the project.
So I am one of the people who works on 90's Golden Drift Spot Project maps. Basically, we are, like the name suggests, we focus on drift maps that you think of as the iconic hotspots for drifting in the golden era. What, a lot of people call the golden era, like the 90s to early 2000s drift scene in Japan. So, a lot of these Touges in modern times, they now have speed bumps, or have changed dramatically to make them no longer friendly to street drifters to come and hit those spots anymore. So we kind of appeal to both people who can't go to Japan and live that kind of life, obviously because of legal reasons or travel or money reasons, and also people that want to relive those nostalgic days of when they used to do it in their youth. There's definitely a lot of Japanese players who talk about how exciting it is to be like it's like they're there again. This time in the safety of a virtual reality where they have no consequence with damage or risking, self-injury or legal issues.
social responsibility and things like that.
Yeah, it's stuff like that.
Very cool. That's an excellent intro. You guys, you really know your stuff. So how long ago did the project start?
Skyflight had already made probably a solid 5 maps or so before I even started working with him.
Okay.
Before I even started modding, to be honest. So he's been at it for a while, probably almost 2 years, somewhere in that time frame. Basically, with the popularity of the custom shaders patch, it brought along things like nighttime and lights. And Skyflight, he's this amazing modeler, but he's not really into keeping up with the latest and greatest tricks and technology. So I actually met him because I was making VAO, or vertex ambient occlusion patches, which basically it's basically a fancy way to make stuff have more depth by being self-shaded without expensive shadow detail. It was basically a performance-free way to make the maps look better. And I started doing that, and I also started making light configs for the maps that had streetlights and stuff like that.
Okay.
And I so he was talking to me on and off because I would make those and release them on the Shaders Patch Discord. And then I eventually put them all together and made the 90's GDSP mega pack that had lights and virtual ambient occlusion for all the existing maps. And that at that point he was like, "Hey, you know what? You've done a lot for me. It's really helped us. Would you be interested in coming on board and working officially as a part of 90's GDSP?" Which to me that was kind of my first dipping my toes into modding. I was this huge opportunity, and I was quite frankly flattered to have that chance. So I obviously jumped on it, and we've been kind of growing and working on stuff together ever since.
Okay. And were you the second member? Did Skyflight start 90's as a soloist, or?
He started as a soloist, but there's another member, Namewa is, I think, how you pronounce it. I'm not sure, and if I butchered that, I'm sorry. was a member that helped Skyflight, but really behind the scenes. Like, they're not very public in speaking or about what they did, but I know they did a lot of kind of 3D work and getting resources to help Skyflight build upon like a foundation, like for reference.
Okay.
So I was the third kind of member officially.
And would you say that at this point, like, it's a 3-person team, or are there more people as well?
There is another person. It's actually, he goes by John 514, and he is a fellow developer on the Shutoko Revival project with me.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
So he's someone who, that's, I met him through the Shutoko Revival project. Once he became a fellow dev, you know, and because like we talk so much and we grew together in our modding skills, as I came over to 90's GDSP, I started like wanting his help. Like, he kind of pioneered the method we use for making physical road meshes, which is like you see a visual mesh and then there's a much more detailed, higher polygon physical mesh that you're actually driving on that you don't see. It's not rendered, but it's just there for the physics engine so that it doesn't feel as rough when you're driving on it. So he kind of pioneered a method for making that and refining it. So I recruited him to help me when I was remaking some of the older 90's GDSP updates to kind of, one, optimize them, and two, just kind of bring them more up to modern standards with the shaders patch.
Okay.
So after John had done a few projects, Skyflight was like, hey, you know what? You should come on the team as an official member too. So he's been like, he helps in minor ways, but in very crucial ways.
All right, that's cool. So I would say that you guys appear to be, and granted, I'm frankly kind of a noob when it comes to the Assetto modding community still. I've only been involved with the title really since around May of last year. But it seems to me that you guys are then one of the bigger drift-related modding teams that is in the community now. Would that be accurate, you think?
I would say so. I would go as far as to say, in terms of modding groups that are making tracks, we are the biggest Japanese specific track maker mod team in the Assetto Corsa modding scene.
Okay, and pretty prolific too. I pulled up your Facebook page, and you've got, at least if it's accurate, 8 like track projects that have been released, and then 6 of these intermission projects as well, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, somewhere in that. It's hard to, you kind of lose track after a while, but we definitely have a solid selection, and you know, most of those tracks are very well known, very talked about, and widely used.
Yeah, and I was kind of surprised actually, because I got really excited by hearing the name. Like, as a drifter and as someone who has lived in Japan as well, hearing a name like 90's Golden Drift Spot Project, you have to be awesome. Like, and you have to check it out as someone who hears it. So I went in and immediately looked at the tracks, and I saw, you know, Hakone, a couple different Hakone routes, and then Hyogo Shobudani. I'm just going to read off a few for people listening to see if this like perks your interest if you are not familiar with all of the work that 90's has done here. But you've got Hakone Ohiradai, Hakone Nanamagari, Hyodo Shobudani, Kanagawa Otarumi Toge, Ibaraki Dosojin Toge, Tokyo Oifuto, and then Kobe Mountain Futatabi, and Tochigi Happogohara. So those are like the 8 main tracks, and I gotta say, I was surprised at my lack of knowledge. I guess like I'm a 2000s Golden Drift Spot guy. I don't know. Some of these tracks I had never heard of, which I expected that I would have been a little bit more versed, but
You know, I'm the same way. Like, I was like, probably would go as far as to say even like maybe greater than 50% of the tracks I had never heard of, and that just shows you like I'm not alone in that. You know, like I feel like I'm pretty deep into the like the golden era drift culture, and a lot of these I never heard of. A lot of these, like, most people couldn't find anywhere on a map if you ask them. Like, that just shows how well versed and how into it Skyflight is. Like, he's like so in the middle of it. Like, he talks to a lot of these people that were really, like, they were street drifters in that golden era, and he goes to them, to make sure he's getting these details right and finding the best spots and asking them, like, what would they want to drive, what do they want to see in Assetto Corsa. So I think the fact that gets so many people excited, and that name is so instantly, like, tells you what it is and why you should be interested, is just kind of part of, like, totally credit to Skyflight for good marketing, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
Good self-promotion.
And it probably wasn't even something that, like, he thought about from a marketing standpoint. It's like, you can just tell the interest is so genuine and, like, so focused that it seems like, well, duh, that's what I would call it. I imagine that's kind of where his head was at. But it's also such a great name. Like, you can't not want to explore it if you're into drifting in Japan at all. So,
and that totally, like, so perfectly, like, would describe the kind of person Skyflight is, because he would totally be like, well, what else would I call it?
Right.
Like, not realizing the kind of subtle genius that is behind it, that just kind of comes naturally to him in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that is so cool. So I know of Hakone, and I know Happogahara and Oifuto, the wharf, but that is it. So, like, even for me, there's so much that I have to learn, and it makes me really curious. I hope I get a chance to talk with Skyflight at some point in the future, whether it's a part of a podcast series on Tandem Talk here, or even just off the grid, so to speak. But I'm really curious what sort of story he has got that led him into all of this. Like, was he in it at the time? Was he a fan of it? And he's of the same age as the people that were driving in those days, because I mean, they would be guys probably in their 40s, 50s, and maybe even 60s that would be looking back saying, like, hey, I was a Touge driver back in the day. Like, it would be interesting if he was like a young guy who was getting into it, because what is so magical about this type of content is it is pre-internet. And, like, I'm 35, so I grew up with technology, but a lot of the things that I did were not documented, and anything before that wasn't documented in the same way. Like, when I wanted to learn about drifting, I had to buy magazines, and I had to look for, like, VHS option video stuff. And like, when I had to learn about car suspension dynamics to help me become a better driver, I had to go buy books for, like, grip racers and extrapolate, well, if it works this way for grip, it probably works this way for drift. I couldn't just go online and look at forums. So, like,
yeah,
it's special to go back and look at that, and I'm really interested in his story at some point. I hope I get to hear it from him.
I think he's a younger guy. I could be wrong. Like I said, he's pretty closed off about his private life. It's not something he brings up, and I'm not someone to go digging, so it's not something we talk a lot about. But I know that he's done a lot of drive-alongs, in his trip to Japan. Like, he's definitely got some connections with people. So yeah, I'd be curious as well. Like, I think that'd be awesome, and it would be really good to have him to chime in on a lot of those details.
I know for me, as someone who isn't Japanese, that is into drifting and stuff, I almost don't hit people up out of respect, like, unless I see them in person, where I have the opportunity to, like, I don't know, read the atmosphere a little bit and see if it's appropriate. But
right, yeah, I totally understand.
Really, you probably just give up opportunities that would otherwise work out. Like, if I just direct messaged every drifter from I don't know, 2000, and was like, hey, next time I come to Japan, can I tour your shop? Probably, like, a quarter of them would be like, damn, you speak good Japanese, and, like, okay, yeah, sure. Like, it's never such a big deal, but people don't take the step, and then you end up missing out. So it's really rad that clearly Skyflight is making those connections and then building this team and putting this project forward. It's very awesome.
Yeah, totally, I agree.
So are there any upcoming projects that you're able to share? Any news for the folks listening?
I know he is. We've been teasing an update on because we did the update for like his very two first tracks were those Hakane routes you mentioned.
Yes.
Nanamagari and you say it so much better than me.
Yeah, Ohiradai.
Ohiradai.
Yep.
He's done the Nanamagari update, and he is currently working on Ohiradai. I've been working on it with him. We've pretty much got it to a near final point. We're kind of like internally testing a final version, so I will probably see that within probably like a week at the most. It's probably any day here that's going to release. So
excellent.
That's what we're super excited to be talking about because his original version of it was much rougher.
Okay.
Just because it was basically his first Assetto Corsa mod. So obviously we've learned a lot of tricks along the way, and it's much more polished. It's much longer, maybe 2 or 3 times as long, in fact. So a lot more is included in it. And having looked at it, he just nailed the atmosphere in terms of, the right kind of details, the attention to detail, like, is put in the right spots. Like, it still runs fantastic. It's optimized well. I was very excited to do the lights for it because it really came to life once we started assigning all those. It's a funny thing doing lights because you're basically just typing stuff into a notepad document, and as you save it, it just all starts coming to life and painting this bigger picture in the game, like right before you as you save each update. It's really exciting. It's really satisfying.
I bet so. That's a really neat way to express that people who maybe are never going to have that skill set can really relate to, I think.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where if you feel overwhelmed by it, you probably shouldn't, because it's kind of as easy as I make it sound. Like, it's really something where you can pull open another light config for a track in Notepad, and you can see, okay, this kind of makes sense. You can click on stuff, see what its name is, and you can copy the code over and just repurpose it for your own use and say, okay, well, my streetlight material is named this, so I'm going to copy this streetlight, change the name, and bam, it works. Like, that's how I learned. That's how most people who make that kind of thing learned, and it's really not as inaccessible as you would think.
Right. So in a way, it's like open source just because of the way that the program works.
Yeah, and that's totally, I credit that to the genius that is X4Fab, of creator of the shaders, custom shaders patch. The way he has built the very foundation of that is in a way that is so user-friendly to people who want to contribute and make content to take advantage of what he has done, the framework he has laid, that it's created a whole scene. It's single-handedly revived the Assetto Corsa modding community, and I think in a large way contributed to the overall popularity and sales of the game itself.
I would totally believe that. I came in after all of that was established, after Content Manager and Custom Shaders patch and Soul had already been out. And I don't know how far behind the curve I am as far as when those came out, but I can only imagine.
It's only been a little over a year. It's not been that long.
Oh, that's perfect then.
Yeah.
I probably would have been disappointed if I'd gotten into it before then.
You might have.
Compared to how good it is now. Of course, the car mods and the tracks existed, but I played without Shaders Patch or Soul for a while before, when I was just learning, because like anybody, especially who comes from IRL, and we talked about this a little bit before we started the stream, but I am a gamer and I enjoy it, but I don't have that much time as an adult at this point to invest into it. And so I got into it and I just wanted to drive and didn't worry about getting the best setup on paper, for example. And I think a lot of people who are more on the gaming side of things get hung up on what is objectively the best instead of what's functional. So I just got a car setup that worked for me, started driving, And then when I installed CSP and when I installed Soul, I was like, holy shit, is this the same game? Like, what is this Assetto Corsa 2? Because it looks so good.
Oh yeah, and no, I totally understand that, and that's the funny part is there's still a large amount of people who just barely dabble in Sims and Assetto Corsa who haven't even discovered what a game changer that Soul custom shaders patch and that stuff can be. So, and to be honest, it's not as easy and accessible as a lot of things. Like you do, like it's not exactly complicated, but if you're someone who never spent time on a PC, never really PC gamed, it's not going to be super straightforward either. So
yeah, like as far as getting all the mods set up.
Yeah, and I think that's yeah, exactly. And I think it's awesome that people like you especially go through the trouble of making these videos to help walk people through that. Because there's really, if you're not using custom shaders patch at this point in time, you are missing out. Like there's so much more to Assetto Corsa that you will not experience without it. And, I can't stress enough how important it is that you give that a shot. So people that are helping spread that around I think that's awesome to see the community do that.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree. It's just really important to help out the people who have their heart in the right place and just don't happen to have those skills. I mean,
right.
The thing for me about that is that real life drifting, especially like when I learned it, it was hard. There wasn't a lot of resources, and the best thing you could do was ask a guy who was putting out, maybe not even amazing laps on the track, but who was consistently linking the track and not spinning. And you could go up to that guy and say, hey, how are you doing this? Or I'm spinning out here. Or my first official drift event, because I learned at autocrossing, which is a solo time attack, like
right.
single car. And this is for people who don't know what autocrossing is. It sounds like you already do. Where they have like a set of traffic cones set up and you run single file against the clock. Like, I started drifting at autocross and amazingly was allowed to continue it because I didn't wipe the course out every time.
I was gonna say normally you get kicked out for that.
Yeah, I did ask the people first, and they basically said, like, man, if you destroy the track, like if we have to keep setting all the cones up because you suck and you bash into them, then we're gonna ask you to stop, and if you don't stop, we're gonna make you leave. But if you don't actually hit the cones, we don't care if you lose, whatever, because like it's time attack, and for anyone who doesn't know, drifting is not as fast as not drifting. So
oh man, don't tell the initial D kids that.
God, I know, but like it's a thing. We'll get into it. You can actually, the fastest driving you are drifting in terms of you've got like a small percentage of tire slip angle, but we can't nerd out about that right now. This is not the time. But I do enjoy going crazy with people. I was actually in the Random Call Sign Discord a while back, and we had a pretty interesting chat about that. Just like, technically everyone's drifting if they're fast, but they're not drifting, not what you think.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying.
Yep. So I learned there, and then went to a real drift event in Pennsylvania at a place that I don't think operates it anymore, called Beaver Run. And it was rainy, and I thought this will be perfect because I had a stock 240SX, and I went out and just spun out all over the place. And because like a drift skid pad event is a little faster than a autocross skid pad event, just because a drift setup would be incredibly boring for autocrossers. They're used to, like 10-foot wide tracks, like tiny, or 20-foot wide tracks at the most.
Right.
So I was like, wow, this is going to be easy, but because it was faster, I was way too slow on everything. Like, I didn't realize I had to speed up my reactions, and so I was doing terribly, and it rained, which I thought would make it easier, but also made it harder. And so then I asked a guy, I was like, hey, can you take my car for a few laps and just like convince me that it's me that sucks and not the car? And of course he did fine. And then I was like, all right, cool, that's how it feels. I can recreate that. And I don't know, in the same way, or in similar ways, I've always wanted to give back to drivers in real life at events and try to help them out and help them overcome whatever they're struggling with and get better. And I know that when you move to digital, when you go to sim drifting, there's a huge population of people that love to drift in real life that maybe don't even have a Facebook or an Instagram account. Like, they're just not tech people.
Yeah.
And several of my like best tandem buddies are that sort of archetype of person. So I'm like, man, I want to make this as easy as possible. If you've never built your own computer, which you don't even have to do that, but it is a way to save money. And if you've never like installed a mod, you've just like done plug and play stuff, I want to help just make that accessible, because there's some really good people that could be awesome to have in a community. But like, that's the trick, is how do you make things accessible to more people? That seems to be how you can grow a community.
Yeah, and absolutely. Not only that, but like, you'd be amazed. You give the right people the right tools, and sometimes they really blow you away. Like, for example, John, who is now part of the 90's GDSP, when he joined SRP, Shotoku Revival Project, he was just a person who had no experience in 3D modeling, no experience in modding itself, but he had a graphic art and a Photoshop background. So he was, he loved the project. He wanted to contribute in any way he could, but it's one of those things where I was like, well, like, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I'd really like to get you set up so that you can see your textures in game live and test them and then tweak them. Because if you give them to me and I have to do that, it's taking so much of my time up that I may as well be the person doing the texture.
Oh, that's fair, yeah.
And he meant well, and he was like, okay. And I walked him through it. I gave him the files he needed. I showed him how to use KS Editor, Assetto Corsa's main modding API. And now he is literally the number dev in terms of being in charge and for being the most active in contributing to the project of Shotoku Revival Project. He's just totally exploded into this very talented 3D modeler and all-around modder. And, he might have never dabbled in that at all if I hadn't really taken him under my wing and give him that opportunity. So, like, you never know what you can bring out of people just by taking some time out of your life to do stuff like that.
Yeah, man, that is so true. Like, I don't think about this ever really, but it occurs to me now, like, what if the couple of people over the years that I'd asked, like, hey, show me how you do this, were like, no, like, I might not be drifting, like.
Exactly, yeah, and that's totally what I'm saying is, like, if you had gone up and, like, and this is so important of why the scene in sim drifting and in real drifting, like, it should be as friendly and conducive to growth as possible, is because, yeah, like, you turned into this person who went on to, to drift and then make content and bring that to people. And you might have, what if the first guy you asked linking the track was like some ego stuck up dick and he just, like, shut you down? You might have been like, you know what, maybe this isn't for me, and not have got into it at all.
Yeah, it's possible. There are certainly people out there anyway who wouldn't be just a stubborn bastard about it and figure it out.
Well, true, yeah, and to be honest, like, the modding scene in Assetto Corsa, especially on the side of car modders, is very, very egocentric and somewhat toxic. But the people that stand up to that abrasiveness and take what constructive things they can have found themselves to be some of the best modders. Like, I've seen people, forged from that fire, so to speak,
right,
to become some truly great modders. Like, I wouldn't say that that's the best, that's the most ideal way for them to have learned, to have been, like, their face repeatedly shoved in the ground of what they're doing wrong, but they still, were stubborn enough to keep at it through that and became really great modders because of it.
Yeah.
So, you can't let yourself to be discouraged, but at the same time, it's really nice if you don't have to be that stubborn person, because some of those less stubborn people may, not get the chance, or
Yeah,
may not have gotten as far if they didn't have people that were helpful along the way.
absolutely. I think that just I don't know. I'm not the nicest person out there, but I try to be just a good, respectful member. You know, like they say, with power comes responsibility, and I don't really feel like I have power per se, but you know, if I know something, I don't mind to share it with people. And there's like two mindsets out there that I typically encounter, which is like if someone else succeeds, it comes at my expense, or like an abundance sort of view where you can say, you know, I there's enough out there that I can accomplish my goals and they can accomplish their goals, and we're not going to interfere with each other too much. And just like
Right.
kindness generally wins, and it also makes the entire community better. And you know, everyone who's trying to make content, it needs to be used by as many people as possible to get the most like satisfaction out of the work that you try to put into this. So there's really no incentive not to share and help people improve, even if they're not going to directly help you in the short term. It'll come back to you. It always does.
And you see, like, that's an interesting point too, because, like, for example, we at 90's Golden Drift Spot Project, we're of the mindset where we really create content for people to get a hold of and enjoy and experience together and contribute and add to the community. But that's not to say that there are modders. Like, that doesn't mean it's invalid for a modder to create content solely for him or for him and his buddies, and to keep it to them, keep it private, and not release it outside of that circle. Like, yeah, that's not growing the community as much, but that's totally up to him, because people do things for their own reasons, you know? Like, and I'm totally respectful of that side of things too. I have a lot of private modding friends, and they're some of the most talented people I know. And yeah, there's a lot of people that are very, very against that. You know, there's obviously the people that are just, you know, they're down on it because they want that content for themselves. They want to experience it because it looks cool. And then there's the other people that are like, well, you're not contributing to the community, you know, like that's not that, you know, it's kind of a selfish thing to keep to yourself and your friends. But at the end of the day, it's really up to the content creator to decide what he wants to do with his content. And I've always made a point to respect that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think what's really interesting about about that entire dynamic is if you want to make something and share it with just your group of people, no worries. If you want to make something and share it with everyone, that's also fine. But what's really interesting is, and I can see this happen online in either direction, and I'm new to this, so I'm only seeing like the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. But
Right.
where it's a little incongruous to me is if you have someone who shares a lot of their content and kind of doesn't say that it's private until like a lot of people get interested, and that's kind of a buzzkill.
Yeah, I can see that.
So like that's a little bit of a difficult thing where like you don't want to share your content out with other, like if it's for sale, totally fine. Like if it's a paid mod, that's totally acceptable to me. Like, well, it's all acceptable, but I have absolutely no worries about that. But what gets a little weird is if you want to like advertise your content but then not give people a way to access it. So like that's just a little bit strange. Like if you're making videos and showing off cool photos, that's rad, but at the same time you kind of wonder like, why are you so interested in sharing this if you're not actually interested in sharing this?
You know, and it's a funny thing because especially like I've been in the scene not that much longer than you, but long enough to see that there's definitely some distinct types of people that do that. And there's definitely the type of people that make content exclusive to them so they can, you know, quote unquote flex it. You know, make
Yeah.
flex on these people that don't have as cool cars as me because look what I made. You know, like there's definitely that. But at the same time, you know, if you spend a lot of time working on something, you're proud of it and you want to show what you've done. You want to show how cool it is. Maybe you don't want to share it, but you do want to, somewhat enjoy the fruit of your work. Maybe not in sharing the mod for other people to experience, but maybe sharing so that other people can appreciate what it is. Especially, there's a lot of groups of private modders who share pictures of their private mods without sharing to each other, because modders generally can appreciate something. They see a car and they're like, wait, that body kit isn't readily available in Forza or whatever to rip from. That's something that person must have modeled themselves. Those shaders look good. They went through the trouble of doing ambient occlusion and light configs and separating out their indicators and reverse lights and all the nerdy details that modders spend so much time on. They can appreciate that. So, there's that side of thing. And then there's other things like we have a track in a Skyline, for example, that was a commission. And part of that person's commissioning it was that this track would be for them, privately for them, to do what they wanted with it. And, that's totally their call. If they want to commission it, we're not going to tell them, no, it has to be public. Or I guess Skyflight could technically do that if he wanted to, but he doesn't, because, he's getting paid one way or another.
Yeah, it's good business.
He's more than happy to make it. So.
Yeah. Good business to respect that. If someone's paying you to do it in a certain way and strings are attached, that's just part of the negotiation. I think I've seen a screenshot of that, though. It looks really good.
Yeah, I do have screenshots of that, and it's one of those things where, like, I haven't shown too much of it because I don't want to offend people. I don't want to make people angry that they can't have it, because it is really cool. But, we spend a lot of time on it, and we're quite proud of it. So we kind of like to be able to show it at the same time. We have to walk this balance of trying not to come off as, like that type of person who is flexing something other people can't have, because that is some sort of, satisfying gratification or something.
Right. I think I struggled to articulate it, and if I had just used the more modern term of flexing, it would have been like instantly understood. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Words are hard.
And I'm kind of an old guy too, so that's a term a little younger than I, so it's kind of not supernatural for me either.
But very, very well placed. Well done. Yeah, so I guess what I wanted to say about that was just, shedding light on both sides of it, because, well, yes, absolutely. Anybody that is making mods is showing off their skill in like a good way. And you should appreciate the skill and respect the skill that goes into it. And that's all well and good. I want people to be able to build an audience, and, you could make an entire content or brand or YouTube channel around making really beautifully edited tandem drift videos with private content, and it should be able to be successful if it's executed right. I'm not an expert on that stuff, but like, I've had a little bit of success with what I do, so I know that it's possible.
Oh, totally.
But, yeah, like if it's obviously a flex and then like a haha you can't have this, then like it's all about the intent. And sometimes you just see a post that has that intent,
it's
and you're
intent.
Like, you dick.
And I think you nailed it with that. It is kind of about intent, and sometimes intent is really hard to assume of someone. So
yeah, that's true. And on the other side, you have people who are not posting content with that sort of, I don't know what you would want to call it, but overtly self-gratifying intent. And then, like, they're responsibly sharing out their content,
right,
and telling people that they exist and that they're doing things. And I think that's rad. And then you get like super entitled random people who don't want to give them a penny and get upset that they're trying to say like, hey, look what I did. Like, I don't think that's acceptable either.
No, and there's a lot of that, and they're trying so hard to take any kind of credit away from them, saying, oh, but your car is based on Forza, all you did was take a Forza car. But that person might have custom modeled, the whole body kit, the wide body, a custom interior. Like, they might have put, like, you can't just take a car and hit a convert button and have it in Assetto Corsa. Like, so much goes into, you can certainly spend only a few hours on it, but people spend months and sometimes, the better part of a year just absolutely poring over every single little detail about it too. So it's hard for, especially in people who don't have firsthand experience modding to understand and appreciate that, and to try to take that away from people, and that makes those private modders understandably somewhat upset as well. So you see a lot of conflict from both sides.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess the moral of that story is just like if you're on the content creation side, don't be snarky about it, you know, like
Yeah,
and then
just
if
try
you're
to
on
be
the
respectful.
and if you're on the fan side, just appreciate that it's rad that people can even do that and that we get to see it. I love it.
And that's like I said, we're always interested in bringing stuff to the community, so there shouldn't be a whole lot of private 90s GDSP stuff. We don't expect there to be. I know Skyflight's done some and is doing some like commercial projects that he is unable to share because it's part of a bigger contract for a company. But like for the large part, we're interested in making stuff for people to enjoy, and the same for me and pretty much everything I make. If it's private now, it probably is because it's not done, and it will be public later. Like that's pretty much all my projects that I haven't released yet are just because I haven't felt like they're in a releasable state.
Oh man, and I can relate to that so much. So we talked about this a bit before we got started, but I have a BFA in graphic design, so I went to school and studied a lot of art, and I can relate as a creator in that way. Like before I had a camera and was trying to do YouTube content or video content, I was learning to paint, I was learning to draw, I was doing some light metal smithing and various things, because to get like my degree, I had to take at least one of every course that they offered in all the different disciplines. And then I focused hard into graphic design on top of that so that I was like well rounded. But so many times, like you make a piece and you don't really want to share it because you're not that happy with it.
Yeah.
As a creator, like you're like, it's got to pass my test before I'll put it out there. And this just isn't done. And on the one hand, of course, you can get hung up on never saying something is done, and at some point you got to cut the cord and just put it out, and it is what it is. Move on to the next project. Don't do like a 10-year project. Do 10 projects a year rather.
Yeah, and that's like, as an artist, I come from an artist background too. That's definitely a hard lesson to learn. It's interesting you mentioned that too, because I know a lot of the people who have all these mods that they've never released, they're the same story where they're their own worst critic, and they're so harsh on the quality they want it to be before they release that, yeah, it's good enough to show in some screenshots from afar at certain angles that hide imperfections,
Right.
but they never like got it to where they were satisfied enough to release it, and they started with other projects, they moved on to new things, and that car, it just got pushed aside and never released. So there's so many cars that are like that people are like so hot after, and it'd be funny if they actually got it and realized why that person never released it in the first place.
Yeah, it's tough because, I mean, man, the internet is just a savage place sometimes.
It is,
so
yeah.
like I can imagine releasing a piece of content and thinking like, man, I hope people don't rag too hard for these like 2 errors, and then just a tsunami of criticism that's really not warranted by people who've not made any effort just like descend on you. I could see being a little bit stressed out about that as a possibility.
And the Assetto Corsa modding scene is like everyone's a critic. Like everyone feels like they're entitled to make these super critical judgments on stuff. And at this point in time, there's so much you have to put into stuff to make it totally take advantage of all custom shaders patch and current mod standards. Like, it's exhausting. So, and I've seen so many people get so discouraged because they released something and it just got torn to shreds, and it's really a shame. Like, I wish that people would be a little more sensitive to matters like that, but it's hard, especially with the internet being the way it is, and with car people in general. The people put a lot of ego into how fast they are, how good of a drifter they are, and more so in sim than in real life. I feel like in real life you realize that people are there, they share this common ground, this passion with you, and you all like make a lot of sacrifices to be at a drift event. Like, it costs a lot of money, it takes a lot of commitment, but there's not that same sense of camaraderie and brotherhood on the internet, unfortunately.
Yeah, a lot of times there's not. You do bring up a really good point though, which is that the uh, pretty aggressive criticism does predate internet technology. Like,
Yeah.
if you go to car meets, you'll find a couple different groups, and within those groups, you'll find people talking shit on the other groups.
Oh,
So
true. Yeah.
that's always been a little bit of a thing. But like you say, it is definitely more exaggerated as people get more comfortable communicating without seeing the face of the person that they just gave their criticism to. And I've always been really thankful that I went to this school and got this art degree. It wasn't like a special art school, it was a state school, but I learned how to critique and I learned how to receive criticism. And of all the things that I learned in school, that is probably the most valuable thing to me, because on the one hand, if people provide unskilled critique, aka, you suck, you're stupid, your videos aren't even good, why did you release that first video in 15 FPS? Like, I don't hear very much of that. I hear like, hey, release stuff in 60 FPS next time.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
and that's such a valuable life skill to have. Like, I can totally see why you would take that away as the most important thing, because it's the
yeah, like,
ability to endure, have a rough skin and take good away from bad. Like I said, kind of those people that were forged by that fire of, really tough love in the modding community. Like that's a very valuable life skill.
yeah, and you just have to not worry about what other people think, but pull useful information where you can. And then the other thing that is really nice, and you can see it in most of the content that I do, and I hope that people in general like will move in this direction if they are at all, if this resonates with them at all, is finding a way to learn to criticize others, because criticism is totally fine. In fact, it's absolutely necessary for everything. But you can criticize responsibly, and then the typical buzzword is constructive criticism. But
Right.
like, if someone has an opportunity to improve, it is an opportunity. It should be something that is good and you're doing them a favor. So, find ways to share your opinion that don't like make it less likely for that person to want to come back and improve upon their work. Give them a value. Don't just like say a fact in a demeaning way. So,
Yeah, and that's I've just learned in life that people are more responsive. Like they're less likely to, or they're more likely to take in what you're saying if you don't trigger defensive mechanisms in them. Like, so if you come off abrasive right up, they're probably going to shut down and not really absorb anything. So like, if you're genuinely interested in helping them and offering constructive criticism, you're going to come at it more delicate than someone that's like, hey, you suck.
yeah,
Because I don't know, like if I'm interested in helping someone, I'm going to try to word things a little softer, because if I feel like the people that are offering rougher criticism are like, well, you can take this or leave it, it's not my problem if you learn from it or not. Like, and there's definitely that attitude too, but then you're not actually interested in helping them per se, you're just kind of flinging your opinion around.
yeah. I wonder, like, we're a little older, so maybe that's
There's definitely I see that in older members more than the younger ones, and that could be the divide there for sure.
yeah. I legitimately wonder if that is not something that people consciously realize. Like, you can choose to still say what you were gonna say, but say it in a way that it's likely to be implemented. Because like, unless you're just being a dick or doing something for your own like self-gratitude, being able to say like, hey, this sucks, like that, it could be a fact that sucks, but like you can serve yourself by saying it in a way that it's going to get fixed, and then you can enjoy the fruits of that. So like,
Oh,
really,
totally.
there's multiple reasons to think about how you say things, and you don't have to not say them, you just have to say them in a way that's actually useful. So
Yeah, and that can be true for like you know, if you go to a track modder and their AI line sucks, and you're mad because you can't enjoy the AI on their map, it is kind of within your benefit to approach that matter a little more delicately and offer that advice, because then they might fix it and you might get a better product out of it. So it could benefit you like in that way. Like, or you could say, you know, what the hell, this sucks. That person can say, screw you, I didn't have to offer that track or AI line to you at all. You know, like,
Yeah, exactly.
and nothing happens and nothing is gained. So yeah, there's totally that side of things too.
Oh man, self-help with Kame drinking 90's Golden Drift Spot project. Didn't really see that one coming, but have to talk about wild stuff like that, because the modding scene in Assetto is really interesting and complex.
It is. It's from like a, I don't, just from like a community and societal standpoint, a very interesting. There's a lot of interesting mechanics about it, I guess.
Yeah, because you've got like a group of people, varying ages, but I would imagine that, you know, they're in their 20s or younger, and
Mostly younger, I would say.
yeah, because it's just how people that are into gaming tend to be,
Yeah,
having more
I would
time to
say
invest.
like the majority, like, because we do most of our interactions on like Touge Union. Shout out to them. They're awesome. And they have given us like a 90s GDSP channel where we have a lot of updates and stuff. But
Awesome.
you know, that's one of those discords um that's primarily people from like 13 to 20, I would say. 13 to early 20s, like pretty much as young as you can be on Discord, like legally,
Right.
up to early 20s is like the core demographic. And the same is true of Shutoko Revival Project, where I spend a lot of my time being a dev as well. And just from that side, the Touge, the drifting side of the community, it seems mostly people in their teenagers. So moderating those communities feels a little bit like being a high school teacher.
Oh man, I can imagine. It's already hard enough if you've got essentially unapproved mods. Like Kunos doesn't, maybe they don't care, but you know, Kunos isn't saying, hey, everybody mod our game, and
No.
then you're releasing the product for free. So like, in a way, all that you have is your reputation and your ego. Whether that's a good or a bad thing is up to the personality.
Right.
But like, of course you want to get value out of that, but it does create some really interesting dynamics, because it's like, well, you're not actually making any money anyway, so like, do you have to get that upset about it? I don't know, maybe
Yeah.
maybe like livelihood doesn't come into it for people, and like, I don't do all this content for the money. It's, I don't make very much, but
We don't either, yeah.
I'm sure, yeah, it's just, that's not really how it works. That's just icing on the cake if you even make $10. But
Exactly. And you know, we've been super fortunate because of, like, I feel like we've really got the better side of the Assetto Corsa community. Like, people generally really appreciate our work at 90's Golden Drift Spot Project. Like, what we do is appreciated to the extent where we do see donations. We see people paying for full versions of tracks like Habogahara. Um, it's really just like, it's really cool because I feel like we get to see the better side of the Assetto Corsa community. And I don't know if it's just because of the kind of content we put out or the quality of the content. Whatever it, and you know, whatever it is, we're super appreciative of that.
yeah, I think that I've managed to end up with that as well. Something about the way that I communicate my stuff tends not to draw out a whole lot of hate. Like, I get some good debate sometimes, but not not too much more. So I know that you guys have um, free versions of tracks that also have some premium content or expanded content that you can purchase. But how else can the community support you guys? Do you have a Patreon or anything?
We don't have a Patreon at this time. I think there was some complications in Skyflight trying to set that up, and the countries that Patreon will allow you to operate out of.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff's like North America centric.
Yeah, so I think that was part of an issue, and like I just really like, because I haven't been in the scene long, like with him, to where I'd be comfortable like saying, hey, let's set it up out of North America, and I'll control like
Right.
the account from that side. So it's we've been directing it all through Patreon, or I mean PayPal.
PayPal, yeah, that's the
So
way to go.
we do have a PayPal link. If you are interested in donating, you can contact us through Facebook, the page, the messenger. That seems to be Skyflight's preferred method of communication. So that's what I encourage people that are interested in supporting us to do. There's other ways people can support as well if you're interested in helping with content, from 3D models to textures and stuff like that. Like, we're pretty open to like, hey, you do cool work, like you should, like, can we use that? Or like that's how I came into the scene. That's how John got into it. So there's definitely more than monetary contributions people can make as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I should have really should have led with that, but being able to share kind of your story about how you got absorbed into or invited into the group, and for John as well. Like I said earlier that sometimes I feel like even for me I fail to ask or fail to inquire about ways to get opportunities, but that's kind of how it works, like you don't necessarily ask with expectation, but to be able to say
Exactly.
like, is there something that I can do? And doors open, and if you don't ask, they won't. So like, it is awesome that you guys are even able to mention that, because like it could really grow, like, and it always helps to give somebody that kickstart to let them create their own content if nothing else.
Yeah, and like I said, like I never asked to be part of this team. Like, I'm super grateful, and I feel very I'd feel like it's such a great opportunity for me, but at the same time, like, so much of what I can contribute now, like, is because I got kind of absorbed into it, and I felt like I really wanted to do as much as I could, and I learned new tricks and new things, and we're growing together, and I'm always like showing Skyflight new ways to approach things, or new stuff we can do to make tracks look better, especially as a custom shaders patch grows. Like, lights come along, we can do that. Grass effects came along, we introduced that into the tracks. um, Now there's this cool new shader that it can make like reflective surfaces, like signs that have kind of like a cat eye effect to actually catch light from headlights and shine it back at you.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
stuff like that will be in the newest Hakone Hiradai update. Like, the reflectors, you'll notice that they are actually catching light and throwing it back at you and shining as your headlights hit them, like on the guardrails. So like little details like that are really cool. We're always growing and learning new tricks along the way. So that's why we'd like to come back to some of our old tracks to give them updates, because we're rapidly growing so fast that sometimes those tracks we made not even just a few months ago, we can come back and revisit and really improve in a significant way.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I'm really excited to see. I'm gonna have to make sure that I drive the old Ohiradai before I get the update. I haven't driven Ural's tracks a whole lot. I need to practice a bit, because like Touge is a difficult thing
Yeah.
to do. You really, I feel like you need to practice offline and get to where you pretty much don't bash the wall, and you can like link the track before you try to tandem, or before you try to go to like an online server. And because it's not a circuit, it, for me personally, it takes me a lot longer to learn it.
Oh,
um,
totally.
it just, I don't really know why that is. I guess circuits tend to be shorter and like a simpler set to grasp. And of course, you can see the peripherals. You don't tend to have a mountain or like a cliff in the way of seeing the next turn, so it makes it a lot more difficult to judge what's coming up.
Yeah, I think there's that aspect. There's, less blind corners. So there's more ability to really see what's happening to make those judgments. But the other side of that too is when you are doing a circuit it generally takes what, like, 30 seconds to a minute to get around, if
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And you get to approach the same corners over and over, and you get to approach them in new ways, and you get to see, okay, that worked, okay, that didn't, and really refine that. With a Touge course, sometimes it's 3-4 minutes from top to bottom. Each one of those turns is unique, and it's 3 or 4 minutes, and till you get to try it again. And if you're going up and down, then it's different in each direction, and it could be 8 minutes. So people don't understand that, and they try to jump straight into Touge, and they get frustrated because they're trying to drift and they hit walls. Like, there's so much more that goes into trying to memorize a course like that, where you can't see around corners, you don't get to approach the same turns repeatedly, and to really test technique or approach speed, line, things like that. And yeah, we really do encourage people to practice offline, learn the course, try to link it before jumping into a drift lobby, because a lot of times the people in that drift lobby, they've been tandeming that up and down, grinding it out thousands of times. They know it like the back of their hand. So if you cause a wreck and you don't get out of the you crash, you don't get out of the way, and you interrupt the tandem train, people get kind of upset about that.
Yeah, and that can be avoided really easily. Granted, we don't want to say something discouraging like you need to put in 100 hours.
No.
But like with anything, get to where you can make it down the track at least 75% of the time. It doesn't have to be perfect, but like if you outright wipe more than once every 10 runs or 8 runs, you probably need to keep practicing a little bit more.
And I would go as far as to say you could probably get away with, like, even if you can't make a run every 3 times. The biggest part about driving online is the etiquette. And part of that is, if you're not confident, like, maybe don't lead, don't jump in the middle of trains, tail behind and try to get an idea of their momentum and their speed through stuff. And the biggest thing I can't stress enough is, in Content Manager, you can bind a shortcut to teleport to pits. And you know what this is great for? Like, I have this right on my shifter, a button on my shifter in my G27. You can go, oh no, I'm spinning. You can be in the middle of a train, and you can slam that button and teleport out of the way before anyone has time to hit you. So something like that is so invaluable for people that are learning to drift and they're worried about getting in the way or causing a crash, getting people upset. Is etiquette extends to the point where if you're not in the way, you're not an issue. So if you use all the tools available to you, teleport to pits, or just being a safe driver and following behind, giving yourself lots of distance, like, it goes a long way, and people will see that. And if you're being respectful, like, generally people aren't going to get too upset if you do mess up and cause a big crash in the tandem train.
Yeah, teleport to pits is a game changer. Like,
it is, yeah.
You should, if you're into drifting, you should run Content Manager just for teleport to pits. And
yeah,
my tutorial series does talk about that at length for a minute, because it's just that important. That's a game changer.
Yeah. Yeah, and Content Manager in general is such a game changer, and you really take advantage of all of Custom Shaders patch. Like, you can't even set the time outside the normal Kuno's time range, which means you can't really get nighttime if you don't have Content Manager. And besides that, the Kuno's launcher is just kind of a mess. It won't even load if you have too many mods. It's just, trust me, you may not be like super comfortable with Content Manager because it'll seem different, but it's worth getting through that initial kind of jarring, like, first using it and it not being what you're familiar with, because it's so much better in every way imaginable.
Yeah, I didn't even use the Kunos launcher for more than a couple of weeks, so
it's so bad.
I actually have the opposite problem. When I go back, if I was to make a tutorial video and I went back, I would have a hard time finding stuff in the stock launcher. So if you've been doing it for a while, it's worth the switch. It's worth the mild headache and the growing pains. But if you're just getting into it, or if you're considering it and you're listening to this, like just get Content Manager straight away, and you'll never even know that there's a learning curve because it'll just be normal to you.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the biggest thing. Like in all of our discords, when people are troubleshooting, we first make sure they're using Content Manager, and if they're, we very, very strongly suggest they start.
Yeah, and I didn't even think about installing custom shaders patch without also having Content Manager in, but you lose
It's
a lot of the
possible,
benefit if you
but
don't
you
have
do
those
lose.
time frames.
Yeah, totally.
So you guys have these 8 main tracks and at least 6 more of these sort of intermission tracks. What are some of your favorites as a driver?
So I tend to the lower power, more lightweight cars. So I like the slower, more technical stuff.
Okay.
I like, I'm a huge A86 fan. Have been for a long time. I own one in real life, so it's obviously, it's funny. A lot of people drive sims to be able to drive cars that they would never get the chance to otherwise, and I oftentimes just find myself driving sims because I want to drive what I already have, just in locations I couldn't drive normally. Or in ways I couldn't drive normally.
Yeah, no,
so
I'm on the exact same page as you.
yeah, and I find a lot of enjoyment in that. So I would say I really like Odorumi.
Okay.
I'm actually the one who did the most recent update for that. So I spent a lot of time like familiarizing myself with all the details to make them look as good as they could. And just there's a lot of like, it's just a fun layout. It's really short, but I don't know, it's really enjoyable. The Sojin is also a really cool one because it's probably the easiest to single lane drift out of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so satisfying when you're in an online. People are really like, they're on their game, and you have tandem trains going both up and down, narrowly evading each other. Like it's really a cool experience.
That would look really cool. I've seen some videos of that in real life and in game, but I haven't. I'm actually not trained enough to be able to do it. I'm working on Dual Sojin right now.
It's a lot of fun. I'm totally down to help practice with you if you want some time.
I surely need it. So yeah, we'll have to make time for that. Would you say that then Dual Sojin is maybe one of the best places for a beginner if they're getting into your all's tracks to check out?
I would say yes, it's definitely the best if you're trying to learn single laning.
Okay.
That being said, it's also pretty forgiving because you can wash out into the other lane for the most part, and it's like usually like you really have to screw up to go into a rail or off the track for most of the turn. There's some of it that's a little hard to link. Like there's only really one turn that's hard to find a line to link, to be honest. Most of it is really flowy. So that's definitely one of the easier ones for sure.
Okay.
I would say the other one is Habokahara, like the drift layout.
Okay.
The section specifically that people turn around at the tunnel and then do like the end of the track and go back to the tunnel and then turn around and go back up. That whole section, it's pretty short, and it's one of those like short enough to memorize, wide enough to get through, technical enough to feel good, and like the momentum doesn't, like you don't feel, there's not a whole lot of like slowing down and speeding up, so it's really good for tandeming as well. So that's like a good one to learn kind of proximity drifting on a Touge with people.
Yeah, that is such a good point to point out to people, and it's something that I'm actually going to include in some of the next videos that I make, talking about what kind of tracks you should learn on, because tracks with the lowest average speed change are generally the flowiest, and that
Exactly
means that it's pretty easy to do. And ease is not a bad thing. I think that a lot of times when you've got a pretty like hardcore gamer mindset, traditionally easy is bad. You want to do
Yeah.
you want to do the hardest thing possible on the hardest or like most crazy extreme car possible. And one of the unique things about sim drifting is it enables complete beginner drifters. And when I say drifter, I mean sim or real life, because it's the same. It enables complete beginners to get into cars that they could never get into if they were learning in real life.
Totally, yeah.
You know,
Like, getting into pro cars with 600 horsepower and, expensive, like super grippy tires, like the kind of tires that, they cost hundreds of dollars and you would burn them off in a VDC style run. You know what I mean? Like you could
Yeah.
a lot of people could never dream to afford to do that or to get the opportunity to do that. And to be able to have that accessibility is really awesome. Like that's part of what makes the sim drifting so cool.
Absolutely. There's such a huge barrier to entry cost-wise on real life drifting, but it is kind of important for people to not get blindsided by the fact that, if you want to have an appreciation, and this is not necessary, but if you want to have an appreciation for the real life drifting, even if all you do is sim, either because you're too young to have a driver's license or because you can't afford a car yet or whatever, just keep in mind the fact that the pro cars aren't automatically the best because they're for pros or because they have the most horsepower or anything like that.
Right.
There's a lot of ways you can come at it, and for people who are really good in sim, possibly the most difficult thing about drifting in real life is not the driving. It's the fact that you're probably going to only be able to afford a car that's very disappointing compared to what you're used to in sim when you're first starting out. Like, unless you save up $10,000 or $15,000 to buy your first car, but if you build as you go, you're going to have a very humble car. And when you're used to being able to switch into, all these different super tuned, super unique, wild builds. And so I just think that like it's important for folks when they're learning to consider starting with humble beginnings and work their way up. It also has the added benefit that like the faster the car is, the faster you have to react.
Right.
So it is objectively harder, but don't make it hard on yourself. Like, there's a reason that people work their way up from not stock necessarily, but lowish power cars like a 250 wheel horsepower 350Z before they go to 400 and 600 and 800 horsepower cars.
Yeah, and I like with those lower horsepower cars, I feel like there's really less room for error. Like when you have lots of torque, lots of power, you can get yourself out of a lot of situations you might have gripped up with, lower horsepower cars. So that's definitely a valid point. Like as hard as the Drift Workshop cars tend to be, those are also, I feel, one of the better cars to get started or to really spend a lot of time learning, because one, they're not they're not grip levels, so it's not like they're super crazy twitchy and like you need to be really reactive.
Right.
Two, they don't have they have a good amount of angle, but they don't have like Wise Fab Pro drift car levels of angle. And for a lot of people that they aren't gonna have those crazy but like serious mods. And that, I guess that's a little different now because a lot of those bolt-on angle kits do get you lots of angles and they're pretty accessible price-wise and availability.
Yeah, they're getting surprisingly cheap. It used to be like $2,000 for the front and another $2,000 for the back to get like that level of, and of course you don't have rear steering, but to get that level of suspension tuning.
Right.
And a lot of people are like, I have $2,000 to spend on the whole car. Like, come on.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
But yeah, it's really good. Basically learning with restricted power and maybe
not all the angle in the world, but a decent amount, and maybe not the super grippy tires. Like I feel the DW cars are kind of aged at this point, but I also still feel like they're a pretty solid practicing platform.
Yeah, and what you unlock with that for anybody who just wants to hear something convincing, I guess, besides just trust us, is the ability to drift at shallow angles and the ability to basically conserve speed, drift in a fast manner
Exactly, yeah.
Because you can get cars that have enough power that you can just blow the tires off in any gear at the maximum amount of angle. But realistically, it's only a matter of time until you encounter a track or a situation where you don't have enough. And then you're going to have to figure out real quickly how to get comfortable driving with a tiny amount of slip angle in order to link a corner. And if you've never practiced it before then, and you're in like especially a powerful car, it's going to be a really bad time because those cars are not forgiving. But when you learn it on a more balanced car that is a little bit slower, you can't use all the angle that the car has anyway because it's not that powerful, and it causes you to drive quickly and expediently through the track in order to like link some of the harder to link turns. And you're just more of a weapon when you go to a car with power on top of that.
Yeah, and I think that's true. You like if you're capable of doing more with less, when you get even more, you're that much more capable. So
Yeah.
it's, if you can really like link a car with a low amount of power, then think about how much easier or how much more you can do with a car that has even more power. Like, I guess it probably goes a lot more in the way of teaching to use the most out of your car and to not rely on crutches to cover up mistakes.
Yeah, probably. That's probably an entire episode for a
itself,
different
yeah.
time. Yes, but
Yeah,
we'll just hit upon that a little bit, the philosophy of how to drive and
less
how to
is
learn.
more. Yeah.
Hey guys, you made it to the end of part 1. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. In part 2, we're going to talk with Soyo about his IRL car, which is an ITB 20-valve AE Hachiroku. So look forward to that. It drops tomorrow. Don't miss it.